Hello and welcome back to our channel. On January 13, 1982, an Air Florida Boeing 737 dropped from a snowy sky and crashed into the 14th Street Bridge in Washington, D.C., dropping 79 passengers and crew into the frozen Potomac River. First responders battled to save a few people from the wreckage 2 kilometers from the White House and within sight of the Pentagon. Air Florida Flight 90, the first breaking news plane crash to receive real-time television coverage, left an everlasting imprint on a generation of air travelers. The incident changed the industry's attitude towards snow and ice contamination in aviation safety. According to investigators, the Boeing 737 was dragged out of the sky by ice, snow, and mud. The crew and industry that created them mishandled the weather, putting 2 inexperienced young pilots in a dangerous scenario. They didn't realize they were doing almost everything wrong and that their rookie mistakes would kill 78 people. Beginning in 1982, Air Florida was aiming for the moon and beyond. Under deregulation, a small regional airline that flew short distances within Florida expanded over state lines with 6 Boeing 737s and a McDonnell Douglas DC-10. As it became America's 16th largest airline, shareholders appreciated the earnings, but pilots were less impressed. Air Florida was infamous for its union-busting policies, and its crews were less experienced and paid less than those of other carriers. On January 13, 1982, Air Florida Flight 90 crashed in 31 seconds, revealing this to the passengers. During a snowstorm in the middle of the Atlantic, an Air Florida Boeing 737-200 landed at Washington National Airport, which is across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. By the time it arrived at 13:29, snowfall had stalled air traffic around the nation's capital, and airport issues were about to follow. The Air Florida flight would eventually be among the last to touch down. 9 minutes after its arrival, the airport's lone runway suitable for jet traffic was shut down for snow removal, and controllers notified waiting flight crews that it would not reopen for another hour. Captain Larry Wheaton, 34, and First Officer Roger Pettit, 31, were Air Florida pilots. Jet operations were unfamiliar to both. Wheaton flew 8,300 hours, mostly on light aircraft, including the piston-engine DC-3. Since Air Florida acquired Key West-based Air Sunshine in 1979, he'd passed around 2,300 hours on the DC-9 and 737. In August 1980, he was promoted to captain with only 1,200 hours of jet experience, compared to 14 years with large carriers. Roger Pettit had only 992 hours of air transport experience, and most of his 3,350 hours were spent flying F-15s in the military. Their experience levels were acceptable, and many pilots flew with significantly fewer hours. The crew's scant knowledge of winter operations was far more significant. Both pilots learned to fly in the South, where snow is rare, and Captain Wheaton had only taken off or landed 8 times in freezing precipitation. Only twice had Pettit washed in snow and ice. This unfamiliarity would shape most of the events that followed. Crew knew their turnaround would be longer because of the runway being closed. Flight 90 to Tampa and Fort Lauderdale was supposed to leave at 14:15, but the airport was closed until 14:30. Thus, it had to be delayed. Captain Wheaton de-iced the jet at 14:20 after their departure time. Pre-flight de-icing is essential when a plane is grounded in snow or freezing rain. A heated mixture of water and anti-ice chemicals is used to melt snow and ice from the wings and tail, which can hinder an aircraft's takeoff performance, especially a jet's. Air Florida's jets were de-iced at Washington National Airport by an American Airlines maintenance team using a warm water and glycol solution. The Air Florida 737's left side was sprayed at 14:20 by the de-icing crew. Before they could finish, the pilots received further bad news. The snow clearing was taking longer than predicted, and the airport would not reopen at 14:30. Wheaton appropriately called off the de-icing crew because he wasn't sure when they'd leave. At 14:53, the snowplows finished clearing and sanding the runway. By then, air traffic controllers were overwhelmed by traffic. Due to poor communication between control centers, airplanes intended for Washington National Airport continued to take off. At the same time, the airport was closed, leaving scores of planes in mid-Atlantic holding patterns. Due to limited ground space, controllers had to find a way to eliminate the equally massive number of planes sitting at the gates and on the aprons to create room for incoming flights. Flights were cleared to land one after another, departures spaced perilously between them, and planes lined up on taxiways awaiting clearance to leave. In the snow, outgoing planes began to pile up since the gates needed to be cleared for approaching aircraft. Captain Wheaton got de-iced again at 14:45 before the reopening. After 25 minutes, the de-icing team from American Airlines returned with the truck and resprayed the plane to remove snow. They sprayed the hot water glycol solution over the wings to prevent ice from forming after spraying away the snow and the ice. At 15:15, the jet bridge was hauled away, but Air Florida Flight 90 was still 11 planes behind. The Air Florida 737 was already accumulating snow after the last de-icing as heavy snow fell over National Airport. Flight 90, shown above, was photographed just before takeoff by a passenger on another jet, displaying at least 2 inches of snow covering the fuselage like icing. Flight 90 was cleared to taxi at 15:25, and a tug pushed the 737 from the gate. The tug struggled to push the 46-ton aircraft up the sloping apron on the slushy tarmac. Captain Wheaton suggested using reverse thrust to help the tug. Wheaton used reverse thrust when parked in snowy weather despite the tug operator's warning. Snow flew everywhere when the engine started and the thrust reverser buckets were deployed. Warm air rushed over the wings, converting the snow into slush that slid down over the leading edges and onto the engines. The plane, however, refused to budge. Wheaton had to turn off the engines again. A tug with tire chains came 10 minutes later, and while the pilots spoke in the cockpit, it got Flight 90 moving. After clearing the gate, the pilots started the engine and prepared to taxi, hurrying through the pre-start and post-start checklists. In winter, engine anti-ice must be activated to prevent ice from blocking crucial sensors. However, it was rarely needed in Florida, and both pilots were used to answering off to the engine anti-ice checklist item. They ignored it and added another link to a chain of events heading toward calamity. The ground controller ordered Aircraft 90 to taxi behind a New York Air DC-9 at 15:38. Snow fell as they followed the DC-9. First Officer Pettit said, "Boy, this is awful. It's the shittiest snow I've ever seen." At 15:46, waiting in line, the pilots drew up close behind the New York Air DC-9 in front of them to melt some snow in its jet blasts. Captain Wheaton remarked, "I'll de-ice my windshield, but not my wing." At that point, Pettit discovered that the two engines had different engine pressure ratios. The engine pressure ratio, or EPR, is the ratio of the rear exhaust pressure to its inlet pressure at the front of the engine. The pilots measure thrust using EPR, which is proportional to thrust. Due to a lack of thrust, Flight 90 was accelerating abnormally slowly. First Officer Pettit was unhappy, but in 1982, only the captain could abort a takeoff. Pettit had no authorization to do so, but Captain Wheaton didn't appear concerned, so they stuck to the plan. Wheaton and Pettit may have hesitated to take off because of the Eastern Airlines flight behind them. The Eastern flight touched down on runway 36 as Flight 90 was still accelerating down the same runway, a dangerous situation caused by air traffic controllers. Flight 90 consumed 5,400 feet of runway, far more than the 3,500 feet needed by the time it reached rotation speed. First Officer Pettit raised the nose, but it rose faster than he expected, putting the plane in a dangerous nose-high position. The plane's angle of attack is also affected by ice. The wing's angle of attack, or AOA, is the plane's airflow angle. Higher angles of attack enhance lift, but only up to the crucial AOA, where the air begins to split over the wing. A stall, a catastrophic loss of lift, occurs when this airflow splits. Ice reduces the AOA at which this separation will take place by making the wing surface rougher. The airplane's stall speed will rise toward or even into the normal operating range, since AOA and airspeed in stable flight have an inverse relationship. Other effects exist as well. If a jet's wingtips have more ice than its wing roots, they lose more lifting capability. Since the wings are swept back toward the tips, the center of lift advances and the wing roots create more lift. The Boeing 737 tends to tilt up on takeoff if the center of lift is far ahead of the center of gravity. Air Florida Aircraft 90 crashed into stop traffic on the 14th Street Bridge between Washington and Arlington at 16:01, 31 seconds after takeoff. The wings and tail section hit 6 automobiles, a crane truck, and the guardrail, driving the 737 nose first into the river. It vanished in the span of a single eye blink. Motorists on the bridge were shocked by the devastation. The plane was only seen for seconds, yet it caused massive destruction. The tail part smashed 4 cars, killing 4 drivers instantly. The crane truck overturned, its boom hanging over the bridge. The jet and its passengers had vanished under the Potomac's churning ice floes. That's all for today's video. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon to stay tuned.